We over me. That's been the identity of the Indiana Fever all season long. It's been about collective effort, shared responsibility, and the belief that when things get tough, the group responds together. We all we got, we all we need. That mindset defines teams that are trying to build something real, something lasting. But now, everything comes down to one moment. It's a one-game season. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the pressure is undeniable. Carrying that mentality into the next game isn't optional, it's necessary. If this team wants to reach the finals, they have to elevate, push beyond what they've already shown, and bring an entirely different level of intensity. When your back is against the wall, there are only two options: fold or fight. And this group has shown flashes of that fire before. They just need to sustain it when it matters most. Now, welcome back to Basketball Fan. Today, we're diving into a topic that a lot of Fever fans might not want to hear, but it needs to be said, honestly and without sugarcoating anything. Because when you strip away emotion and loyalty, when you look strictly at the numbers and the structure of the league, one harsh reality becomes clear. The Indiana Fever cannot afford to run this roster back next season. It's not about chemistry, it's not about potential, it's about math. And the salary cap doesn't care about how much fans love a player or how well a team vibes together. The numbers are what they are, and in this case, they paint a very difficult picture. On paper, this roster looks like something you'd want to keep together. You've got a generational superstar in Caitlin Clark, a franchise cornerstone in Aaliyah Boston, and one of the league's elite scoring guards in Kelsey Mitchell. That's a core most teams would dream of building around. The natural instinct is to say, keep them together, build continuity, and let the team grow. But the problem is, the WNBA's financial structure doesn't allow for that kind of idealism. Tough decisions have to be made, and not everyone can stay. Let's start with Kelsey Mitchell, because she's at the center of this entire conversation. Mitchell has earned every bit of leverage she is right now. She's been one of the most consistent scorers in the league, and making all WNBA first team only strengthens her case. There's almost no scenario where she takes less than a supermax deal, and frankly, she shouldn't. When a player reaches that level, they deserve to be compensated accordingly. The Fever could use the core designation on her, essentially ensuring she stays, but that comes with a massive financial commitment. We're talking roughly $1 per million per year. That's a huge portion of the cap allocated to one player right out of the gate. Then you look at someone like Odyssey Sims. She had a phenomenal performance in the semifinals, 27 points in a crucial game, but when you analyze roster fit, things get complicated. With Caitlin Clark running the offense and Kelsey Mitchell dominating as a scoring guard, there just isn't a clear role for Sims that maximizes her strengths. It's not about talent, it's about overlap. If Clark wasn't on this team, Sims might actually be a perfect fit. But Clark is the centerpiece, and everything revolves around her. That likely means Sims is the odd one out. Next comes Ari McDonald, and her situation is one of the trickiest. She's proven she can contribute, but injuries have been a consistent issue. Still, the WNBA market has a tendency to reward potential and past production, sometimes even over current availability. With the expected growth in salaries, a mid-tier contract could land somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. If the Fever decide to keep her, that's another significant chunk added to the total. Now let's talk about the front court, specifically Natasha Howard. She's experienced, versatile, and has been a valuable piece for this team. But here's where things get uncomfortable. Howard is likely going to seek a max-level contract or something very close to it. And while she's still a good player, there's a legitimate argument that she's no longer worth that kind of money. However, free agency only takes one team willing to make that offer. All it takes is a single front office to drive up her value, and suddenly the Fever are faced with a difficult choice: overpay to keep her or let a key contributor walk. Either way, you're looking at an estimated $900,000 if she stays. Then there's Aaliyah Boston, who is absolutely non-negotiable. She's a franchise pillar, a foundational piece you build around no matter what. Letting her go isn't even a consideration. And because of her impact and trajectory, she's going to command a max deal, around $2 million. That's another major financial commitment, but one the Fever have to make. When you start adding these numbers together, things escalate quickly. Mitchell at $1. For million, Boston at $1. 2 million, Howard potentially at $900,000, and McDonald around $500,000. You're already approaching $4 million, and that's before filling out the rest of the roster. That's where the real pressure kicks in. Now shift to the role players, because they matter more than people realize. Sophie Cunningham is the kind of wing every team wants: tough, reliable, capable of shooting and defending at a high level. Players like that don't come cheap. She could easily command between $650,000 and $700,000 on the open market. Even if she takes a discount to stay, you're still likely looking at around $500,000. Then you've got Lexi Hull, who fits incredibly well within this system. She's a restricted free agent, which gives Indiana some leverage, but that doesn't necessarily mean she'll be inexpensive. If other teams make aggressive offers, the Fever may have to match at a higher price point. Realistically, her value could also sit around $500,000. And finally, there's Caitlin Clark. Right now, she's still on a relatively affordable rookie-scale deal, but even that is expected to rise under the new salary structure. For now, estimating her at around $500,000 is reasonable, but that number won't stay low forever. And when it jumps, the entire financial structure of the team will feel it. So when you step back and look at the full picture, it becomes obvious why running this roster back isn't realistic. You're stacking massive contracts on top of each other in a league with a hard cap. Even if every player wanted to stay, even if the chemistry was perfect, the numbers simply don't allow it. That's the brutal side of professional sports. Sometimes it's not about what you want, it's about what you can afford. And that's where the Indiana Fever are heading into one of the most important off-seasons in franchise history. Because the decisions they make now won't just shape next season, they'll define the entire Caitlin Clark era. Continuing here on Basketball Fan, this is where the situation for the Indiana Fever goes from difficult to almost impossible when you really sit down and process the numbers in full detail. Because once you stack everything together, not just the star contracts, but the role players, the depth pieces, and the hidden costs that most fans don't even think about, you start to realize that this isn't just a minor roster squeeze. This is a full-blown financial crunch that could force the franchise into decisions that reshape the entire future of the team. Let's pick up exactly where things start to tighten. You're already looking at major commitments: roughly $900,000 for Natasha Howard, around $500,000 for Ari McDonald, and a massive $1 million for Kelsey Mitchell. And that's not even including the earlier numbers we talked about for Aaliyah Boston and Caitlin Clark, who are absolutely central to everything Indiana is trying to build. When you total all of that up, you're already hovering in the range of $6 to $7 million committed to just 7 players. 7. Not a full roster, just over half of one. And here's the critical point that changes everything. At that number, you've essentially hit the salary cap. There's no wiggle room left. There's no flexibility to go out and make a splash signing, no room to reward emerging players with better deals, and no safety net if something goes wrong. The Fever would be operating right at the edge financially, and in a league like the WNBA, that's a dangerous place to be. Because now comes the part that fans often overlook: the rest of the roster. You still need to fill out 5 more spots just to meet the minimum roster requirements. And if your cap space is already maxed out, the only way to do that is by signing players to veteran minimum contracts or extremely low-cost deals. That's where things start to unravel. Take a player like KK Timpson, for example. She's not a headline name, not someone casual fans are building around, but she's the type of depth piece every team needs. Someone who can step in, provide minutes, bring energy, and contribute when called upon. But even she is projected to cost around $300,000. And when you're already pressed against the cap, even that number starts to feel like a luxury you can't afford. That's how tight things are. That's how unforgiving the math becomes. Then you look at veteran presence, players like Sydney Colson and Brianna Turner. These are not just role players. These are experienced professionals who bring leadership, stability, and locker room presence. Those qualities matter, especially for a team built around young stars like Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. But here's the problem. Other teams across the league are going to value those veterans too. Younger teams looking to take the next step are going to offer more than the minimum to bring in that experience. And if Indiana can only offer the bare minimum, they're likely going to lose out. Think about that for a second. The Fever could theoretically retain their core, Clark, Boston, Mitchell, and still not have enough money left to keep the very veterans who help make that core functional. That's not just a roster issue, that's a structural flaw. Because talent alone doesn't win championships. Depth matters. Chemistry matters. Experience matters. And when you can't afford those supporting pieces, even the most talented core can struggle. But it gets even more complicated. Because beyond free agency and current contracts, there's another layer to this problem that makes the situation even more unstable: the draft. Normally, the draft is where teams find affordable talent. It's where you bring in young players on controlled contracts, develop them, and use them as cost-effective contributors. But in this scenario, even that becomes a challenge. If Indiana commits all their money to bringing back the same roster, they might not even have enough cap space to sign their own first-round pick. Let that sink in. You go through the entire process: scouting, drafting, investing in a young player, and then financially, you can't even bring them onto the roster. That's not just inefficient, that's a sign that your cap situation is completely out of balance. And this is where the conversation shifts from difficult to unavoidable. Because when you reach that point, you're no longer asking what you want to do, you're asking what you have to do. And those answers are rarely comfortable. Do you consider using the core designation and then trading Kelsey Mitchell to free up space? That sounds extreme, but it's the kind of move teams make when they're boxed in financially. Do you let Sophie Cunningham walk, even though she's exactly the kind of player every contender needs? Do you move Lexi Hull, despite her fit and upside, simply because you can't afford to keep everyone? These are not hypothetical what-if scenarios anymore. These are real decisions that front offices have to confront when the cap starts squeezing this tightly. And no matter which direction you go, there's a cost. You're either losing talent, sacrificing depth, or weakening your long-term flexibility. And if you think this situation is tough now, it becomes even more complicated when you look ahead to the future, specifically 2027. Because by that point, Caitlin Clark will no longer be on a team-friendly deal. She'll be on a full max contract, which is exactly what a player of her caliber commands. And when that happens, the financial pressure intensifies even further. Imagine a scenario where Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell are all on max-level contracts. Not even super max, just standard max deals. Even then, the combined cost of those three players alone would consume the majority of the salary cap. At that point, building a balanced roster becomes almost impossible. You'd be forced into a very specific and very risky strategy, filling out the rest of the roster with rookie contracts and veteran minimum players. That's it. No mid-tier contracts, no flexibility, no margin for error. Every draft pick has to hit. Every minimum signing has to outperform expectations. Because if even one or two of those moves don't work out, the entire structure collapses. We've seen teams attempt this model before. The Phoenix Mercury tried to navigate a similar path, stacking top-end talent while filling the rest of the roster with low-cost players. And while it can work in theory and practice, it's incredibly difficult to sustain. It requires elite scouting, perfect roster construction, and a bit of luck. Because when you're relying on minimum contracts and rookies, you're gambling on potential more than proven production. And that brings us to another concern surrounding Indiana: their track record in scouting and talent discovery. To put it bluntly, the Fever haven't consistently been one of the league's top scouting organizations. They haven't been known for finding hidden gems overseas or uncovering undervalued talent in international leagues. And in a situation like this, that becomes a major disadvantage. Because around the world, in Europe, in Australia, in various international competitions, there are incredibly talented players who can contribute at a high level for a fraction of the cost of established WNBA veterans. Teams that invest in international scouting pipelines often gain a huge edge, especially when they're tight against the cap. They can find players who fit specific roles, who bring unique skill sets, and who come at a much lower price. But historically, Indiana hasn't leaned heavily into that strategy. And if they don't adapt, they could find themselves stuck, unable to afford domestic veterans, and unprepared to tap into international talent pools. That's a dangerous combination. So when you step back and look at the full picture here on Basketball Fan, the conclusion becomes unavoidable. This isn't just about one off-season. This isn't just about one or two tough decisions. This is about an entire roster construction philosophy that needs to evolve. Because the current path, trying to keep everyone, trying to run it back with the same group, simply doesn't align with the financial realities of the league. The Fever are at a crossroads. They have one of the most exciting young superstars in the game in Caitlin Clark. They have a dominant presence in Aaliyah Boston. They have elite scoring in Kelsey Mitchell. That's a foundation most franchises would kill for. But having talent and managing talent are two completely different challenges. And right now, the biggest challenge facing Indiana isn't what happens on the court, it's what happens off of it. It's about navigating contracts, making sacrifices, identifying value, and building a roster that not only competes today, but remains sustainable tomorrow. Because if they get this wrong, if they hold on to the wrong contracts, if they fail to adjust, if they ignore the warning signs from the numbers, they risk wasting the prime years of a generational talent. And in this league, that's something you simply cannot afford. What usually ends up happening in situations like this, when a team is completely squeezed by the salary cap, is that organizations start cutting corners in ways that don't immediately look obvious, but slowly chip away at the overall quality of the roster. Teams begin signing below-average domestic role players, often veterans who may have been solid contributors years ago, but are now just trying to hold onto a spot in the league. And while those players can still bring experience, the reality is they're no longer difference makers. That's not how championship teams are built, and it's definitely not the formula for long-term success. When you zoom out and really evaluate the entire picture surrounding the Indiana Fever, the conclusion becomes hard to ignore. This roster, as currently constructed, simply isn't financially sustainable. Something has to change. Whether that means making a bold trade, letting key contributors walk in free agency, or completely rethinking how the roster is structured from top to bottom, a major decision is coming, and it may arrive much sooner than fans are prepared for. Now here on Basketball Fan, this is where the conversation gets even more frustrating, because once you move past the headline names and start analyzing the rest of the roster, the financial pressure becomes even more obvious. This isn't just about the stars, it's about the ripple effect their contracts create across the entire team. Take Bree Hall, for example. There just isn't a realistic scenario where she returns if the Fever commit heavily to their core. And that's not necessarily a criticism of her ability, it's simply the reality of the numbers game. When a team starts stacking max and near-max contracts for players like Caitlin Clark and Kelsey Mitchell, the margin for keeping developmental or fringe rotation players completely disappears. It's one of the harshest truths in professional sports. Sometimes it's not about talent, it's about timing and financial flexibility. And in this case, the Fever may have neither when it comes to retaining players like Hall. The same logic applies to Petty. She's been a reliable veteran guard, someone who understands the game and can provide stability when needed. But when you're building a roster around ball-dominant players like Caitlin Clark and high-volume scorers like Kelsey Mitchell, the available minutes for additional guards shrink significantly. And when minutes decrease, so does justification for salary allocation. In a tight cap situation, veteran depth pieces are often the first to go, not because they're ineffective, but because they become expendable in the broader financial structure. That's the part fans don't always like, but it's the reality teams have to operate within. Then there's KK Timpson, and this is where the financial math becomes even more precise. If the Fever choose to keep her, you're looking at roughly a $300,000 contract. On the surface, that might not seem like a big number compared to the million-dollar deals being handed out to star players. But when you're operating at or near the salary cap, every single dollar matters. That $300,000 can be the difference between keeping another role player or being forced to fill a roster spot with a minimum contract. It's the kind of decision that doesn't make headlines, but has a real impact on the team's depth and flexibility. This is where front offices earn their reputation by navigating these tight financial margins and making the right calls under pressure. Looking further down the roster, Kalia Copper or players in a similar position financially represent an interesting case. These are players who might realistically be available at or near a veteran minimum, making them attractive options for cap-strapped teams. For the Fever, this type of player could become essential if they're forced to fill out the roster with cheaper contracts. But even then, nothing is guaranteed. Free agency is unpredictable, and it only takes one competing offer to change everything. Another team with slightly more cap flexibility could step in, offer a better deal, and suddenly that affordable option is gone. That's the volatility of the market, and it's something Indiana will have to navigate very carefully. And that brings everything back to the core issue facing the Indiana Fever. When you pay your stars, and to be clear, the Fever absolutely should invest in players like Caitlin Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell. You're committing to a delicate balancing act. The rest of the roster has to be built around affordability, efficiency, and fit. You're constantly weighing the value of each contract, deciding who can stay, who has to go, and where you can find cost-effective production. It's a high-pressure situation, and there's very little room for error. Because once you start filling out a roster with minimum deals, things can become unstable very quickly. Injuries hit harder because you don't have reliable depth. Slumps become more damaging because there aren't enough proven players to step up. And over the course of a long season, those small weaknesses can add up, turning a competitive team into one that struggles to keep pace with deeper, more balanced rosters. So when you step back and look at everything here on Basketball Fan, this isn't just about one or two players, it's about the entire structure of the team. The Fever are entering a phase where every decision matters. Every contract, every roster spot, every move in free agency will have a direct impact on their ability to compete at the highest level. And the margin for error is incredibly thin. That's why this upcoming period is so important. The front office has to decide what direction they want to go in. Do they double down on their current core and accept the limitations that come with it? Or do they make a bold move now, before the cap forces their hand, and reshape the roster in a way that gives them more flexibility moving forward? There's no easy answer here. Every option comes with risks. But doing nothing might be the biggest risk of all. So now the question shifts to you. Do you think the Fever should keep this core together no matter what, even if it means sacrificing depth and flexibility? Or do you think it's time for a major move, something that changes the trajectory of the franchise before the financial pressure becomes overwhelming? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying this breakdown here on Basketball Fan, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives like this.